kicking live on YouTube, and no, Facebook's hanging. Hey everybody on YouTube, we're just waiting for Facebook to catch up. And we are live. Hi everybody, this is the Armed Society podcast for Wednesday the 27th of January 2020. We're going to be kicking off the recording here in just a second. I want to remind everybody, before we do, you can comment on the live stream, and I will get your comments up on the air as soon as I get that set up. It seems like Facebook now and YouTube are making me go through hoops after we're already live. So I'm going to hand this over to Rob here. He's going to give us a 5 count, and he's going to kick the show off, and we'll go from there. Rob, your baby, it's all yours.
5, 4, 3, 2. Welcome. We have gun owners and mental health on this week's Armed Society. Produced, directed, owned solely by the Second Amendment Foundation. Our host, Paul Lathrop. Our guests, Jake Wiskerson and Mike Soldini. Mike, are you still with Eagle Imports?
Oh, no, I sold that to do Walk the Talk America full-time about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago.
Okay, so I'm behind the time. Formerly of Eagle Imports, now full-time.
Formerly of
and
Eagle
Jake,
Imports.
And you're with Zephyr Wellness, right, Jake?
I sure am, and I sure do appreciate you pronouncing my last name correctly, because almost nobody gets that right.
The benefits of practice. Guys, when you look at the U.S. today, we have blinders on about mental health. And I guess, Jake, this is closer to your wheelhouse, so maybe not. I'll let you fight over it. What fraction of us are going to seek mental health counseling at some time in our life?
Oh, man. These days or yesteryear?
Yeah, before COVID crazy or during COVID crazy.
The landscape is changing. But let's take that into context, though. So we got this COVID bomb dropped on us, and it wasn't specifically COVID so much as the lockdowns that drove everybody's symptoms crazy. So the Centers for Disease Control actually tracks how people are doing on a regular basis. They do these surveys across the country periodically, and when we compare 2019 data for January through July to 2020 data, what we notice is about a 4 to 5-fold increase, regardless of demographic. Now, the youth experienced a much higher spike, and what we're talking about is symptoms of anxiety, depression, or both. And in the youth, and they can consider 18 to 24 youth, they had the highest spike. It was about 5.5 times what it was the year before. Wow. And as you go up in age, that actually goes down a little bit, presumably because as we age, we go through life and we develop some distress tolerance, and we learn to weather life a little bit healthier. But we definitely are seeing an uptick, and I can tell you that my business is we have clients out the door, and that's not unique to us. All of Nevada rests comfortably in last place with regard to behavioral health provision, and we've been there for quite some time. But across the nation, we've got no shortage of demand for clinicians and a very short supply of clinicians. So the cool thing is that people are getting their mental health tended to when things go sideways, right? The bad thing is that it opens the door for charlatans, fraud perpetrators, and other maleficent beings. But at least now we're starting to have the conversation on social media. One of my dreams at the end of my career is to be able to talk about mental wellness the way that we talk about physical wellness. So if you're sitting in the lobby of Zephyr Wellness, you can Snapchat yourself, getting my anxiety treatment on just as easily as somebody posts a CrossFit video working out. So we're getting there. That's encouraging, but it's also disturbing that so many people are struggling.
Well, our particular focus is on mental wellness and gun owners. And those, for a long time, were oil and water. I can't admit that I have a problem because I fear someone would take my guns. On the other hand, we've got urban gun owners who are different than their rural cousins, if you will, gun culture 2.0 versus 1.0. Out in the country, everybody knew you had a gun. It was accepted. And although we've extended gun culture to the cities, I'm concerned that urban gun owners are a little isolated. They say they have lots of friends being in the city, but if you ask them if they know a gun owner, almost to a man, they say, nope.
Mike's got. Sorry to cut you off.
No, Mike, talk to me about that.
Mike's got a strong opinion about that, and then I'll jump in.
In terms of just what, or the urban gun owner knowing other gun owners? Is that like, are we talking about the new wave of people that have come kind of to the forefront in gun ownership?
Yeah, the last year and a half.
Yeah, this obviously
they didn't grow up with a bunch of gun fighters.
Right, and that's me, right? that's how I grew up. Even though I had, obviously nepotism was great for me. Eagle Imports was a family-owned business. I didn't grow up around firearms. Growing up in the two places that I grew up, which are very urban areas, right? The shore of New Jersey, Asbury Park, and then San Francisco, California. One thing I love about this, though, is this is an opportunity for the Second Amendment community to really seize this moment and bring people into the fold, reach out to them. We need to knock off all the stuff that we do. It's like, now you get it, damn liberals, all the stuff that has been said about many of the people, the new people that have come on board. This is a moment for the firearms industry to actually look like a hero to many. And be welcoming and really be there for them. Like you said, a lot of these people do not have relationships with people that own firearms. So I think it's a really great time for the gun shops, especially, and the employees of the gun shops, to take advantage of this moment.
I'll jump into here, Rob. If you don't mind. I've got it. My story for the listening audience who doesn't know is that I've basically been a lifelong gun owner, but I was never really into the culture. And that was because I didn't know anybody in the culture. So I was raised in a family full of cops. The gun was a tool for duty, and we didn't really play. We didn't go out and shoot in the desert as much as I would have probably liked. We did hunt a little bit, but it was reserved solely for fall. And then I stepped into WTTA, and I really started getting into the culture. And I was like, man, this is cool. What have I been missing out on my whole life? But what I'm seeing now with the advent of this 8 million-ish new gun owners we've seen over the last year or so is a handful of them are in my own friend circle. And they're asking timid questions. They don't know stuff. They're intimidated by the culture, I think. Probably the same that I was. I will say that, frankly, now having come out of the closet, so to speak, as a clinician gun owner, because the clinical world doesn't really like guns either. Right. The gun community has done a poor job of really welcoming in new members, like Mike alluded to. And I'm now finding myself in this strange position where I'm bridging the gap not only to the clinical community, but also to new gun owners. As a lifelong gun owner and somebody who's kind of plugged in, I'm like, no, it's not as scary as you think. Come on with me to the range. And it's been really fascinating to see that unfold with some of my friends who are like, oh, so this is what this means. And I don't have to be scared to click on this link because like somebody may be watching my browser history or something and think that just because I went to a certain website, now I'm like a gun person. I was like, well, what does it mean to be a gun person to you? What is that? Why are you afraid of that? And they can't articulate it other than through what's been fed through the media. So it's a problem on both sides. Acceptance of this culture is a big issue.
And it is a culture. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Everybody knows someone who took their own life. Some used a firearm. Okay, now we have to ask the question, are guns the problem? And I want you guys to talk about suicide. It's hardly polite conversation, but let's talk about it. It's, wow. More people will die of suicide probably than of the flu or COVID. What do you guys, let's talk about the size of the problem for a minute.
Well, I don't know about those numbers. First of all, it depends on who's keeping track of COVID deaths.
Yeah, we'd have to get accurate numbers.
Yeah, but what we do know are that half of suicides are completed by firearm, and that's a big problem. In the military, almost 70% of suicides are completed by firearm. So that's among active duty and veterans. It's a big deal. Is the gun the problem? Unequivocally, no. It's not the problem. The gun's not the problem any more than the ocean is the problem for capsized boats. So we just need to take that off the table. That's a non sequitur for me. It's a non-starter, and it's just political football that people like to toss around to restrict rights. So what do we do then if it's not the tool and we can't restrict the tool and we got however many 100 million guns floating around in America and however many 100 million gun owners? Okay, we're not going to deal with that. What do we do? Education. At the heart of every firearms owner, I believe, is a desire for liberty, to recreate, to defend, to be responsible. And liberty comes with a personal responsibility. It means that you have to be responsible for yourself, but you also have to allow other people to be responsible. Now, what do we do with this responsibility thing? Well, we teach. We teach and then we entrust that what we've taught is going to be embraced and implemented appropriately so that we can all end up being safe, having conversations, being responsible, and then holding each other to account. We don't need some overlord telling us how to do it. We don't need police roaming the streets telling us how our behaviors should be or should not be. What we need is more education, and I think that's where we step into this fold as Walk the Talk America, is we say, here's knowledge, here's information. I can teach you about emotional functioning. I can teach you about psychological functioning. I teach you to understand yourself and your brain and how it all ticks, so that when crises happen or distress falls into your life, you can tolerate it without going to these extreme ends like substance abuse and suicidal ideation. Mike's job is to try to help convey that message, and I'll hand it off to him because I know he's got a lot to say about this too.
Yeah, you brought up something. You mentioned the elephant in the room, right? Suicide by firearm is an elephant in the room, especially the 2A community, gun culture, people that are into firearms. I was actually telling a story earlier today in a meeting that I was in. When I first came back to Eagle Imports after I had left when I was younger, my family rehired me as a sales rep, and my boss at the time was he became a very good friend of mine. And in 2008, the president of the company died of a stroke. That was my uncle. And the owners got together, this is before I owned it, and they made the decision to make my friend Bill the president of the company. Bill's a great guy. Everyone always kind of said, oh, how does that make you feel? Well, Bill becoming president of the company was like me becoming president of the company, because that's how well we work together. When my uncle passed away in the industry, every organization came out and they made a dedication, or they put it in their publication, of his passing, and they honored him. When Bill passed away, nobody did anything. And it's not like I'm angry about that, but the difference is one was a stroke and one was suicide by firearm. And I truly believe that the silence was simply because we don't want to make the firearm, firearms owners are protective of the firearm. They don't want to make it the enemy. They don't want to give people the ammunition they need to come after us. And that's why it's just such an important thing that we take it back, right? Because when I first started Walk the Talk America, all I wanted to do was give money to the mental health people and have them fix it. And when I realized that they didn't really have the answers, it forced me to look at what we can do as the firearms industry with the advice clinicians that are on our side, to make programs and policies that are completely out of the box that no one ever thought of. Right. And that's what we do at Walk Talk America. I mean, whoever thought that you could take a firearm and it could not only represent freedom and protection for you and your family and whoever, your loved ones, but it could also represent a place where people could go to get help and find the resources they need when they're in crisis without fear of consequence, or legislation.
All right, Rob, if I may, I'm going to add something too, because there's some significant parallels that I've found going through this. And my dog's poking my arm right now. She loves being pet. But in my profession, I've been doing this for about 12 years now, and I've come to a pretty solid determination that we as clinicians are the ones who do the stigmatizing, and we don't do it on purpose. But what's fed to us in the classrooms is stuff like, if you see one of your clients in public, don't acknowledge them, turn your shopping cart and go down the other grocery aisle. It's like, well, what does that say to the recipient of care? It says that they should be ashamed to get care. I mean, this has roots way deeper than just gun, non-gun, tough people trying to solve their own problems, resilience, bootstraps, all that stuff. That is a problem. And that definitely follows certain industries too. Certainly the construction trades, plumbers and pipe fitters, first responders, like the people who respond to people in need, healthcare workers broadly. Like, we all think we need to put on a tough face all the time. But beyond that, there's a stigma that we as clinicians have perpetuated through our own actions and behaviors that is totally unacceptable. No other profession does that. No other profession says to its students, don't go online, don't go on Facebook, don't have a social media account because they might find you. It's like, who is they? The people I'm trying to help redeem their own life? That's a horrible message to send. So we bear some responsibility in this too. And I think when I say I want to normalize the conversation, like I want selfies being taken in my lobby, the way we do that is we don't refer to it as an elephant in the room. We don't refer to it as stigma. We just say, oh, yeah, you seem a little down. Do you get checked? Do you take a free screening, which we offer, by the way, at the WTTA.org website. Get your head checked. You get your car checked if it's squeaking. You know what I mean? Like, we need to be more normal about the conversation. And I think that's my invitation to anybody who's listening, firearms owners or not. Just talk about it. Don't pretend it's a thing. Otherwise, you're adding to the problem.
Yeah, and I'm struck. I have doctors who are friends. I will not ask them a medical question in a social setting. That's, I don't ask the plumber to fix my drain when he comes over. But there is something about the medical profession. You and I know guys who are afraid to go to the doctor, which, if they're really sick, is a bad decision. Are we staying mentally ill more than we need to because there's a stigma about the firearms community asking for mental health checkups?
I've talked a lot. I can certainly answer that, but Mike can also do it.
Mike, that's a gun owner question. Are we afraid of the shrinks?
Yeah, absolutely we are. My emails would tell me that, right? These become anecdotal, these stories. But yeah, I think that there is this fear that, and part of that has been ingrained in us in the messaging and the fear mongering. I know this is probably going to make some people angry, but yeah, the NRA, their messaging of the mental health people, that side is all gun grabbers, circle the wagons. I feel us. Like, right. And when you create the A-team, B-team like that, of course. And then what happens is people start making assumptions, and then they start passing bad information along, and then it just goes from there. I mean, one of the things that I thought was great when Jake first came on board is he flat out wrote a nice little blog piece that was like, clinicians can't take your guns. And I was really excited for that because, I had discovered that by talking to a few, but then just watching Jake work through, I don't even know how I would do that without some serious consequence. And Jake, you can kind of touch on that if you'd like. But that was really fun to watch because it started the conversation, right? It started a conversation with gun owners going,
Yeah, part of it is I don't really give a rip these days. Life's too short, and there's too many people suffering. So I'm not interested in niceties. I will be compassionate, and I will be empathic, and I will try my best at every turn to see things through other people's eyes. So in so doing, what I'm trying to do is circumvent fight or flight response, and that's a yield theory trick. Christian Conti, who's a good friend and mentor of mine, invented this concept called yield theory. You meet people where they are, see life through their eyes, and communicate in direct but kind ways that don't elicit your fight or flight reflex. It gets defensiveness. So when I write a piece that says counselors can't take your guns, what I want to do is I want to stipulate to fact and law, and not just have my bloviated opinion out there saying this is what some dude in Nevada thinks. And it is Nevada, not Nevada, by the way, for those of you who may be confused. We get very prickly about that. So what I basically said is we have this ethical code, and every profession has it. The ethics dictate how you conduct yourself, of course, but then also they dictate what you can and cannot disclose. And those ethics, to my knowledge, across all 50 states, are actually embedded into law. So if I break ethic, I am therefore breaking law, and I'd lose my license. I go out of business. There's potential criminal penalties, but there's certainly civil penalties for it as well. So that's basically what I said. I was like, our first line of defense is not to pick up the bat phone to the government and tell them that I've got some dude with PTSD who enjoys plinking in the desert and that alleviates his stress symptoms. That's absurd. I would lose my career over that. And I think people don't understand that. Interesting though, and we can dovetail into red flag laws if you care. We actually got some feedback on that letter. A guy from the East Coast wrote it, and he's like, actually, you're not entirely correct in your piece that you wrote there, buddy. And he pointed out that there are some laws back east that do permit clinicians to quote unquote turn people in, red flag them, if you will, for being unsafe. And there are some repositories into which your mental health treatment records could go, but that's not really any practice. It's not best practice. It's not common practice. It's very extraordinary, if anything. And we've worked enough now with the VA that I could say the VA is moving away from the idea of putting all mental health records into some free access repository that can later penalize you down the road if you want to go buy a firearm, for instance. So
Gotcha.
we need to push that off the table too. Like, don't be afraid to come in and get care if you're struggling because you think that I'm gonna squeal on you. That couldn't be further from the truth. If you're really, really desperate, the first trip is to the hospital. It's not to the deputies to come take your guns.
Gotcha. Now, Jake, I've heard you say that your profession, mental health, is both new and the second oldest profession, in the sense that people in crisis have always spoken to their friends. They've always spoken to their family. And maybe now that we're more atomized, more individualistic, more separated from our family as we move across the country, we need to rent a friend in a mental health capacity. Okay, if we were back with our family, there would be some alarm bells that going, that's not just he's feeling bad. What are the alarm bells where we, as a friend to someone who owns firearms, what are the things that just, say, wait a minute, this is not a little strange. I'm thinking of things that just really damage our ability to think. Addiction. I've known people who were on chemotherapy and they had cancer brain. What are the other, I hate to use the word red flag, what are the other alarm bells, the unusual circumstances where we say, no, talk to a professional and maybe we need to take your guns till you're better?
Certainly open expression of ending one's own life, and phrases like,
wow,
maybe it would be better if I weren't here. Maybe it would be easier on everybody if I just went away. I wonder what life would be like if I weren't here. And I'm not talking about waxing philosophical in the middle of the front room with beers around while you're playing Monopoly. I'm talking like, you can read people, right? We can all do this. There's plenty of research out there that says we know what people are feeling by what they register on their face. And if you know somebody well enough that they've changed substantially and there's some consistency to that over time, we want to pay attention to those types of triggers too. It's the same thing we'd see in children. They start isolating, if their mood changes, if they're consistently complaining, negative, down, can't find joy in anything, loss of interest or pleasure in activities that used to interest and please them. That kind of stuff is all stuff we should be on the lookout for. Here's the problem, though. We now have these great mobile devices into which we can dive ourselves. And prior to, I don't know, 2006, whenever Facebook, came out and then social media exploded thereafter, where we escaped was really visible to our loved ones and our friends. It was like, oh, wow, you're playing softball 6 nights a week now. That seems a little odd. Geez, that bowling league really took off. Right? Video games till 3 a.m, 4 nights a week. That seems a little out of the... Well, now we don't know anymore, since everybody walks around glued to their phone. And this can have impact on marriages and child rearing and all sorts of things. If you're just glued to the screen, you're disconnecting from life. And when you disconnect from life and the people who actually matter, you can find yourself in a bad way pretty quickly, and you don't even realize it.
If I could, we're starting to get some comments coming in on social media. And for those of you on YouTube, I do apologize. I do have problems getting comments off YouTube, so I have to copy and paste. But Iron Horseman says, I think suicide rates are a result of society removing individuals' self-worth. In past years, the suicide rates were lower because society, which I cannot talk tonight, society bolstered individual self-worth. Do you guys think that's accurate, Jake or Mike?
Yes, but again, I'm hogging the show, so I'm happy to share the screen and the airwaves.
Jake, I think you're the perfect person for that. I'm not, by no means do I have that answer.
All right, so here's what's happened, and we know this from data. Suicide rates have climbed since approximately the advent of social media. They have extraordinarily climbed for teenagers, and particularly teenage girls, since approximately 2011. And that was, if you can read this, in Jonathan Haidt's work, The Coddling of the American Mind. He's wonderful. Look up Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. He talks about how that's the first generation, people born in like 1996, first generation where they knew social media from middle school on, and it disrupted the developmental pattern. So now we're seeing this transgenerationally, though. There was a point in my life where I was 36 years old, and I could reasonably mark halfway point between internet and no internet, because I was like 18 when I graduated in 1996, and there was barely the internet then. I still had to look up things on card catalog in the library, and I played like computer games with an actual diskette. And then after that, I'd lived 18 years on the other side, and I was like, this is kind of destructive. This is long before the research ever came out. So now we have this research and these data, and they show that absolutely we are being separated. And I think to the point that's being made in the comments here, the self-worth, we call it self-efficacy, is derived from things that you do, that you're proud of, that no one can ever take away from you. That gives rise to good self-esteem. Now, self-esteem can come from anything fleeting also, like my good haircut, or it's a good haircut, I love my barber, or this fancy jacket that I got, or my home, or my car, or my kids, or whatever. All that stuff can be taken away. I don't want my family to die in a fiery inferno, but if they do, that doesn't affect who I am and my character. However it came out of the womb, the inner soul of who I am, how God made me to be, is still intact, despite anything that happens. Now, what's also still intact are things that I've accomplished nobody else can take away, like knowledge, or a job well done, or a great performance, or a championship. Now, here's the key, though. We also have this self-efficacy based on bad things that we've done of which we're ashamed. We let people down, we've destroyed things, whatever. We've wasted resources. Now, where we direct our attention is going to give rise to where we get our self-efficacy. We focus on the bad stuff, we don't feel good about ourselves, we live in shame. Focus on the good stuff, we feel great, and we live, and so forth. Here's what I think social media is doing. It's creating an artificial comparison of everybody's best moments while I'm living my actual life, full of good and bad. So if I'm surrounded by this false mirror that says, oh man, my neighbor went on vacation and he had a great time, and the person down the street's kid graduated high school, and look at those fancy decorations out for Christmas, and what do I have? I'm comparing all the time now, and I've forgotten my own self-efficacy. I've forgotten my own self-worth. So that's not to say social media is inherently bad. It's supposed to be a tool, but the problem now is that the tool has become an addiction, and a tool just sits there until you need to pick it up. I got a book here. It's actually by Christian Conti called Walking Through Anger. If I want to pick up this book and read it, I can. This is a tool. The book doesn't call to me like our mobile phones call to us with the little blinking lights. So that's where we go sideways. And if we don't have the self-discipline to say no, or we don't have the self-efficacy to continue moving forward. Oh, is Rob being introduced by? It sounds like a pretty female voice, but then I'm gonna hand everything over, and I don't know who I am anymore because I've just surrounded myself with this weird mirror of everybody else's worth. It's very bizarre, and paradoxical, and I don't like it.
We've got a couple more comments I want to get in real fast. Oh, but I don't know how fast they're going to be, but I got a couple more comments I got to get in here.
We got a half hour. We're good.
Steve on YouTube says, "Why are you a hero if you buy a one-way ticket to Switzerland and eat a bottle of pills, but a sick villain if you check out at home?" Serious question.
Yeah, I don't know how true that is. I think it depends on the feedback we get from people who evaluate those things as such, right? It's tough because we put value on things and events and activities and not necessarily on relationships. And it sounds like an intensely personal question there. I haven't actually had that experience. What I will speak to is I think we're miscategorizing a lot of loss of life that probably is self-taken, like the single vehicle, single occupant rollover by the person who's known to drive really carefully, suddenly just decided to go way too fast over the speed limit. Those are things we want to look at, and I don't think we properly attend to those because, and here's why is it easier to chalk somebody up as a hero who took a vacation and checked out versus somebody who did it in his home? I think it puts it out there away from us. If we acknowledge that there's something inherent in the path this person took, then maybe I have to look at myself, and maybe I could have had a role in that. But if the appearance is they were having fun, we get to be a little more comfortable in our own ego states. And I don't mean to rabbit trail that too much, but there is definitely a way that we package things that makes it safer for our own worldview than maybe we should be.
All right, one more question coming in from social media, and this I think is very accurate. Charlie says, Freakonomics wrote about the suicide paradox, Goethe's novel The Sorrows of Young Werther, as a reason why suicide increased. If the media and people discuss suicide, it increases the likelihood of it more. I disagree, he writes. It helps people sort out issues by having a helpful discussion. What are your thoughts about reaching out to those who need help? What are the signs to look for in who needs help and hides it well?
Paul, I want to frame that before, and I'm going to toss this to Mike. Because, Mike, lots of people contact you. All right, you're both in the people business. But, Mike, you've already told me, how does a gun owner? I go, I got this buddy, and I can't tell whether it's a rocky point in his marriage or I got to rush over and say, please don't hurt yourself. How do we, as gun owners with friends, boy, that sounds strange, say, this is, I think this is gone one step too far.
Now, gun owners with friends, I just want to be sure, it's not the same as friends with benefits.
I think it's gun owners with ammunition these days, Paul, actually.
Okay. Sorry. Mike, go ahead.
It's such a hard question to answer, Rob, and I had told this story earlier about Bill. Bill took his life with a firearm. One of the hardest things for me was being around his family after, because we were traveling, we were doing the show circuit we had the NRA show, we had all these distributor shows. So I was with him for the last 2 months, and people always want a sign that we missed, or they always want an answer, and sometimes you just don't have the answer. So I don't believe that talking about suicide creates more suicides. I just don't believe that. I think it's important to talk about that. I think that's why we're in such bad shape now, is because we spent so much time not talking about it and hiding it and having a stigma. But the honest answer is really not one that probably one wants to hear. It's pretty doom and gloom. It's many times you can have someone take their own life right in front of you, in terms of you're around them and their behavior is indifferent. Now, if they are showing signs that are pretty obvious, like Jake alluded to, like breaking things that are normal, that they normally do, their normal routine, right? They're giving away all their belongings. They're, trying to, things like that. Yeah, I think that then you address the situation head on. Where our intersection is with firearms and mental health, right? So there's a chance that we could reduce the number of suicides by firearm. I don't know if there's any chance that we'd have an impact on suicides overall, to be honest. I don't know if anybody has that impact, but we can do our best to try to reduce suicide by firearm, and that's going through the proper steps. When you have a friend that is a firearms owner, and making sure they're okay, making sure that they can get access to help when they're in crisis.
I heard a guy. I'm going to make 3 points real quick. I heard a guy whose video got forwarded to us from Colorado yesterday, I think, Mike. And his quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it, is, "My guns will not be used for suicide." I was like, that is awesome. That's awesome. If we could trend that through the entire hobby industry profession, we all win. Because it says, I'm going to take personal responsibility for storage and access and prevent unauthorized access. I was like, bravo, that is brilliant. My guns will not be a tool for suicide. Awesome. Mike mentioned something that's not polite speech either, which is, hey, we may not prevent suicides. We're going to prevent firearm suicides. Because then you get the, well, why bother? Well, because we're responsible firearms owners, and we're not going to be on the hook for somebody's death because we were irresponsible. That's why. Beyond that, we go, hey, get help, right? And so talking about it brings it into the open. Now, a lot of times people will roll around this stuff in their head, and it's not really real, and then one day it is. If you speak it, it crystallizes it, makes it real. This is goal setting 101. What's the best way to achieve a goal? Speak it, write it down, and share it with a friend. If you just have it rolling around in your head, chances are pretty good you're going to make excuses not achieve your goal. So in talking about it, that can be really spooky because, all right, so you say, hey, you think about checking out? And somebody goes, yeah, actually I am. And then you go, oh shit, what do I do now? Right? That's the next step. Wow. And there's ways we can help common people who are not clinicians for professional reasons understand how to have that conversation, and then refer to appropriate resources. That's what Safe Talk is. That's what assist training does. But what you don't do, and I will make this a little mini training session, never, ever, 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 if you're suspecting somebody who's on the brink of self-death, don't ask them, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And even worse is, are you thinking about hurting yourself or something like that? Because if they are thinking about suicide, they will say, nope. Because they're not. They're thinking about dying. They're not thinking about hurting themselves. So then you're like, oh, well, I asked, and he said no. So you ask specifically, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about checking out? Are you going to eat a bullet tonight? No? Okay. Well, you have me on edge, and here's why. And then now you're talking about it, right? And that person goes, oh, wow, he cared enough to ask. That's super cool. You will not plant the idea in somebody's head about suicide simply by asking. Research has shown that overwhelmingly. That's a false trope, and we don't need to talk about that. Please ask.
Jake, you need to say that again. Say that part again.
You will not plant the idea in somebody's head about suicide simply by asking. And here's why. If you really want to know the why behind it, who's ever thought about what the world would be like if they weren't there? Everyone. If
everybody?
you haven't, I will call you a liar, because that's part of the human condition. Part of being a human is wondering what your meaning and worth are and your value and your contributions to life. So obviously the other side of that is, well, what if I weren't here? And then usually people go, well, my kids wouldn't have a dad, and my wife wouldn't have a husband, and my business wouldn't have an employee. And there's all sorts of what we call them protective factors, reasons for not dying. But if everyone's considered it, that is suicidal ideation at its purest form. We just don't pathologize it and make it, sound ugly. I teach the police academies up here. I've been doing it for about 3 years. And I do that. It's a little bit tongue in cheek. I go, hey, who in here has thought about taking his own life? And nobody's hand goes up because they're all trying to be cops. And there's another stigmatized profession, right? And I'm like, just kidding. And then I explain that, and you see the looks go around the room, and kind of, elbows in ribs, like, oh yeah, okay, I get what he's saying. Like, okay, therefore, let's not judge people who are also in that same position who are really considering it. Let's step into it like real human beings and go, hey man, I get it. Sometimes seems like taking yourself out does seem like the best path.
Well,
are you there?
There's something else you said, and I want to hear, because you guys are having these conversations. Oh wow, am I going to offend myself if I express concern about my friend's mental health? That's kind of an uncomfortable conversation. It makes me uncomfortable. I fear it will make them uncomfortable, and they'll resent the question. I think we're overthinking that.
Yeah, that's the stigma playing a role. That's our own inability to deal with this stuff. So I love teaching emotional functioning because nobody does it, and it's super fascinating and really cool and well researched. But you won't find emotional functioning in any curriculum anywhere, really. These days you get social and emotional learning kind of working its way into the classrooms at the lower levels. But when I teach cognition, which is your reason, thought, analysis, otherwise known as executive functioning, your frontal lobe, versus limbic system, which is your emotions, your feelings, and how they intertwine. People are like, I didn't know that. It's like, yeah, well, why would you? You haven't been taught it. Once we teach enough people that, we're going to have more comfortable conversations about uncomfortable things, because we'll know how to tolerate the emotions that arise with them. And that's my goal. I'd love to have everybody comfortable talking about uncomfortable things. In my community, it's, finances, sexual orientation, sexual activity, suicidal ideation, parenting a little bit. And we never talk about firearms. Nobody ever talks about guns in our clinical world. And I think it's because of the stigma. So if we can push through that and say, yeah, it's fine, just have an uncomfortable conversation. You do it enough, it won't be uncomfortable anymore. I think you're going to end up having more healthy conversations for sure.
Okay. Go ahead, Paul.
I want to draw an allegory there a little bit. Eons ago, we're talking, I'm going to say 30 years ago, when I took EMT training, and I know EMT is medical, not psychological, but one of the things that stuck out when I very first started going through EMT training as a kid was they told us, look, if you're uncomfortable touching people, physically reaching out and touching people, by the time you're done with this course, you won't be. Right. And that I want to, Jake, you said something, if you have the conversation often enough, yeah, it's going to be tough the first few times, but you seem to make it sound like the more times you have that conversation, the easier it gets.
You don't forget compassion, though. You always want to portray compassion. In the podcasts and in interviews and sometimes in supervision, I can sound a little glib. I can sound a little rough around the edges. Maybe I like I'm swinging my fist in the air, and that's fine. But if I'm actually in a moment with somebody who needs me, I'm not condescending them. I'm not lecturing them. I'm not browbeating them with a bunch of intellect and statistics. That's not polite, first of all, but it doesn't fit with the ability to circumvent someone's fight or flight response. If you're trying to reach them, you have to talk in a way that's going to be heard. And the best way to do that is to do it with compassion. And compassion, by the way, literally defined as calm. It's from Latin. Calm is with. Pati is suffering. So you're literally suffering with somebody, not doing it for them, by the way. We don't suffer for people. That's a waste of energy. You suffer with them, alongside them. You help them through. That's not judging them. So yes, the more you practice it, the easier it gets, but you need to infuse it with compassion every time, lest you become calloused and condescending. Like, just snap out of it, man. I did. It's like, yeah, just because you practiced it doesn't mean that you have this person's answer. They're going through it for the first time. Like kids, like, he should know better. He's 5. How should he know better? You have to teach him. He's walking the earth for the first time, right? So we got to remember compassion for sure. And I'll say one thing too. I would rather have a pissed off friend than a dead friend.
Amen.
Right.
Okay,
yeah, the one thing we got to understand, Rob, just one quick point.
Yeah.
This industry, this culture, there are a lot of alphas, right? We get a lot of. It is what it is, and it comes with the territory. Sometimes it's bestowed upon us by other people, and it's not even really there because they are like, "Ooh, he's into guns, he's tough." But what Jake said, the compassion piece. No one ever said that we couldn't have compassion as a firearms industry. Right? No one ever said that we couldn't be socially conscious. We just started choosing not to do those things. I don't know why, but I think that we need to get back to taking, and this is what I love about the work that we're doing, right? Not just because it's Walk the Talk America, but it's literally saying to the rest of the world, like, we have a problem. We've identified it. We're not going to just hide and not talk about it anymore, but we're also going to look for ways that you can't even make us do. Like, nobody could make us do, right? We're going to look at these ways, and we're going to get people the help they need, and we're going to get the proper information out there. And then you don't have anybody else saying, well, we made the gun industry do this, or we told the gun industry to do this. No, we impressed the rest of the world with, we're doing a lot. Let me show you, right? Now you can leave us alone, because what we've done with restriction, what we've done with laws, it's not working. If it was working and the numbers were going down, they might have a point, but they don't. So it's good to try something else.
I want to brag on you guys. And Jake, you talked about it. You opened the door. You talk to police, a very I think they're still in academy or recent grads, ought to be part of their continuing education about mental health, because they have a difficult time. That's a hard job. Mental illness is almost ought to be a comorbidity for police officers. Okay, I'm going to flip that over, Mike, and direct it at you. How are we as the gun culture talking to mental health professionals to say, hey guys, you don't have cultural competence when you talk to us? How are we making mental health wiser to treat us better?
Wow, he just teed that up for me, huh?
Just lobbed it right in. Just
lobbed me the softball. Thanks, Rob. Walk the Talk America. It just so happens to have a cultural competence course that is gaining so much traction across the country. That's bringing the mental health clinician into our space. And having the dialogue and conversation. One of the things that I always heard, and remember in the beginning of the show, I said that I really didn't grow up around firearms, right? So when I got into the culture, I always heard this, and I felt it was super sincere from most of the people in the industry. They were like, if they would just understand us, if people just took the time to educate themselves or understand us and understand these little nuances about the firearms industry, the reason why the AR-15 is an issue, that they don't understand that if by the language, if you ban that, then you're going to ban all semi-automatic firearms, little things like that. And that's what we're trying to tackle right now, is to create a space where people feel comfortable coming in, learning Gun 101, and having the dialogue and understanding. And the greatest part about it is, and once again, all these stories become anecdotal, but and Jake can attest to this. It's so fun to watch mental health clinicians do the mental jiu-jitsu, right? And go, oh my God, I never even thought about that. I never even thought about the way I even ask my my clients about their firearms, this is something that's blowing me away. I didn't even realize. So I feel like that's one of the ways you do it, right? Is you have the conversations, you create the workshops, but you also create the safe space, and you drop the alpha stuff, the macho thing, because that doesn't attract everybody. It's a certain person, and I think that we got to get away from that. And that kind of goes back to the original point about bringing in all this new wave of gun owners that we've never had before.
Yeah.
So I'm a newbie to the culture for all intent and purpose, and my view as a more or less an outsider is that the gun industry broadly, and obviously there are some accepted individuals and companies, but the gun industry broadly has made up its mind on almost everything, and they are not evolving. They're not interested in receiving feedback. They're going to stick in the 20th century, and they're going to stay there come hell or high water, whether it costs them their entire profession or not. And I find that highly offensive as a person who hangs his hat on lifelong learning. But here's where it really, where the rubber meets the road with what we're talking about. The inability to receive feedback is an ego defense that says, I don't want to learn more, because if I do, I'm going to have to let go of something I think I knew this whole time. And that's that alpha thing that Mike's talking about. Like, we got to drop the alpha thing. Well, if you drop the alpha thing, you're left kind of like holding nothing, and that's a very scary thing. And if you don't know how to tolerate fear and receive feedback, not only are you going to be very lonely, you're not going to grow. So for everybody who says, I've never done learning, I've always got stuff to learn, and then doubles back with, no, I've made my mind up on X, that we're finding out the first one. Right.
I want to bring up, if I could, real quick. I've got one more comment I want to get in here, and Charlie says, suicide is a bigger problem than most think. The numbers are higher than the CDC reports, about 40,000 a year. Suicide by lifestyle, overeating, driving recklessly, are signs of wanting to check out, in my humble opinion. I myself, again, going back to when I was a kid, I know a guy that committed suicide by truck. Great driver. Worked as a maintenance person at a restaurant I worked at, and was going through a divorce. And one day, a guy I knew to always wear his seatbelt undid his seatbelt when he got in his car, didn't put his seatbelt on when he got in his car, and made a hard left turn to do a head-on into a truck. It got counted as a traffic accident. I will never be convinced it wasn't suicide.
Yeah.
Wow.
Charlie's making a great point there. And it's, I don't want to end the show on doom and gloom. I want to end it on hope and inspiration and optimism and enthusiasm, right? So here's what we can do. We can call out bad habits, right? It's become impolite in society to question people about their bad habits, and I'll just judge it as bad, whatever you call it, unhealthy, call it ineffective, but call it a bad habit. Berenstain Bears and the Bad Habits. We have a book about it, but now it's turned into shaming. And shaming now is associated with bad, and we never do that. Well, here's the problem with that. So I teach emotional functioning, right? Shame is one of our 10 core emotions. Shame's purpose is to tell you that you failed to meet somebody's expectation and you let them down. Why is this important? All right, well, we're all tribal human beings. And there's an anthropological theory that I talk about in some of my presentations that suggests that the reason Homo sapiens evolved the way that we did is because we have bigger limbic brains, meaning we have more emotional capacity, and smaller thinking brains compared to some of the other hominids like Australopithecus and Neanderthal and stuff. So theory goes, the reason they all died out and we survived is because we hung together in tribes. Shame is important. We don't want to get rid of shame. Shame's important because we maintain our association with the tribe. If we fail to meet the tribe's expectations enough times, they could just kick us out. And if we get kicked out, we die because we don't live alone. We live in community. Guilt is very important too. So as a neurological function, shame says we failed to meet somebody's expectations. Guilt says go make it right. So if we take shame out of the equation, we just go, don't ever shame anybody ever again. Well, what's happening is what Charlie's observing there. There's nobody holding him to account saying, dude, you're obese, you're going to die. This is science. This isn't a matter of politics or opinion or culture. It's science. You're too fat. Your body can't handle it. Your heart's pumping too much. Now, of course, we have fat shaming, so we can't hold them accountable. You know, like science says cigarettes kill you. Like don't smoke a bunch of cigarettes in a row, right? Like that's science. So if we care, we present truth in love, and we say, "Hey, I love you to pieces. I don't want to lose you to this thing that you could correct." Whether it's internal demons from post-traumatic stress, or it's external demons from too many Cheez-Its, as I'm looking at my Cheez-It box across the way.
And as I
we'll have an intervention later.
As I puff on my cigarette.
Suck down that heater, Paul.
Guys, you
go ahead, Rob.
Paul, let me jump in. You guys have worked with firearms manufacturers. Many of them include mental health and safe gun storage literature in the box as it comes from the factory. What do you need to do more things like that?
We need money.
Okay, tell me about that.
Yeah, for 2 years, almost 2.5 years now, we've gone and done all these great things, and no one has taken a salary, no one has taken a cut. Jake, especially Rob Pincus, anybody that's been involved is doing this for the love of the game. What I found is that most of these manufacturers, thankfully, have taken the burden of producing the card themselves, and the card you're talking about is the one I have in my hand right here. Manufacturers are putting this in the box. It leads to free and anonymous mental health screenings. Gun shops are putting this at their gun stores, and we're connecting with the local clinicians and also resources to get help. Many of the people will take upon the cost of the card themselves, but here's the thing: no one's ever really going to say no to it. Right, and that's the thing is some people don't. Some manufacturers won't pay for it. I want to be able to just give this to anybody that says, "Hey, I'll do that for you. I'll put it out," but they're not willing to pay for it. And that's why we need to cover things like the cost of these things, the travel, the everything that we put together, all of our programs, our cultural competence course. These are things that we've all been doing for free. I sold my business, Eagle Imports, 2 years ago. And basically went home to my family and almost gave them a heart attack when I was like, I'm going to do this full time. And they're like, well, you're not getting paid. Right. So,
right.
Dad,
are we living in a tent?
Yeah, we need funding, and the funding will go a long way. And the great part about it is, like I said, this is all new. Moving people's minds. When the mental health community sees what we're doing, sees the action taken by companies like Armscore, High Point, putting the card in the box, they're blown away by it.
And I'm glad you named names because they deserve a shout out.
Yes.
Yeah, Ruger just donated. That's awesome. That was a huge win. But I want to add something to this too. In a year that set records, all-time records, what are you going to do with that money? Because now the politics are not in the gun industry's favor. The manufacturers will be compelled to do something, and they will not like it, or they can voluntarily do it and then have something to brag about so that they're not compelled to do something. We're here. Just use us so that, fill in the blank manufacturer of whatever they manufacture can go, here's the card, we put this in our boxes, or here's a sticker we slap on all our ammo, or here's something that goes in our rifle scopes, or whatever it is, our accessories that we make. Leave us alone. We are doing it, and we're not compelled by law to do it. We're doing it because we're responsible citizens. I think that's the message that needs to get out. It's not going to take much to kick down, a few grand a month to make this thing work so that Mike can feed his kids. I'm blessed enough to have a salary generated by my employees, and I take that very, very preciously. So I get to go out and do these things because I enjoy them. Mike's really the only one who doesn't.
I'm gonna steal Mike's tagline here. There's something we can do this week to be safer. Talk to me about self-care. what does it do, and what happens if we don't do it?
We've got just about a minute left, guys, of the 1 hour that we were going to be doing this. So, if I could,
Yeah, but that's how Mike almost ends, so I was going to have him tee that up to leave.
there you go.
Now, what were you gonna say?
Mike, we just had a comment come through on social media. Ghost Tactical said, I printed that card and a stack is now at my local gun shop on the counter.
Thank you.
Love you, Trey.
Yeah.
How, let's, if I could, where can that card be printed and anything else in the next minute and a half we got?
Okay, just go to the website, WTTA.org or walkthetalkamerica.org. Also, too, you can find us on most, the big social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at WalkTheTalkUS. All of our resources are on the website, and also we interact. So if you have any questions or you have an idea, or maybe even like a print shop that would like to donate their printing services to, contact us. Please let us know.
All right. Well, Rob, why don't you go ahead and send us home, because we're coming up rapidly on the hour.
Jake Wiskerson of Zephyr Wellness, Mike Soldini, Walk the Talk America, formerly Eagle Importers. Thank you both. You are Walk the Talk America. You are at the intersection of the gun culture and mental health, suicide prevention. You are willing to have the hard conversations. You've told us where we can find you, both to support you, and you have mental health screenings there. Is there a moment of need? We know where to turn. I'm going to throw a burden on you. When you have some successes, some failures, some insights, you have to come back. Deal?
Anytime.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Oh, well,
There you
we
go.
also have a podcast.
Oh,
Please
tell us
promote
about
that.
Mention the podcast.
Please.
Rob Morse may or may not have been a guest on that podcast. It's called Guns and Mental Health, and it can be found anywhere podcasts are found.
Awesome. Well, folks, we are going to go ahead and shut it down from here. Thank you for watching, and come join us next Wednesday night for another Armed Society podcast.